Good
morning, good afternoon, good evening. So today we'll be delving into Japanese culture and Japanese life in a way through Good Shufu. We'll start with a small tea ceremony that should set the mood. So it'll take a couple of minutes. Yeah, I think that should take us
Very
to
good.
Japan.
That music
so,
made the sunrise very serene. Thank you.
I think our Japanese guests can talk later about this instrument, which is supposed to be the national instrument of Japan. Okay, so today we have 5 people. This month we have 5 people having a birthday. We have Sangeeta, Ishan, Saida, A.V. Suresh, and Pushpita. And definitely we have Ishan with us representing them. This is a song.
Hola, it's your birthday. We're here to party and sing to you. He's from. Hope you are bueno. The fun will rain the whole day through. From the Gulf to the mountains, the city lights and fountains. We hope your birthday's excellent. So perhaps you should, cause today is your day. Hola. You deserve a grand fiesta, and later on siesta, and the best of everything. Sí, señor.
Wow. Like we have 7 people in a month that we called Saptarshis. This is the month with 5 people. So you could think of them as the 5 elements: earth, water, air, wind, and space. Now I leave for you to decide who is which one. Pushpita has asked me to thank all of you for your good wishes on her birthday, because her Melbourne friends have organized a day out with her. So I hope you will excuse her from today's meeting. Okay.
Well, I wish we could join her.
Yes.
Yeah.
one more time.
Okay, that's a complete English. Okay.
Happy birthday all.
Yeah, this
Happy
is a very
birthday.
special birthday for Ishan because he's been displaced in the celebrations by his granddaughter. So thank you very much for celebrating his birthday like this. We are
Okay.
celebrating.
We know where the priority,
All right.
we know where the priorities lie.
So special happy
You
birthday,
deserve your
Ishan.
day, Ishan. You deserve your day.
And that music is definitely part of Ishan's persona. I don't think it fits anybody else as well as it fits him. Ishan is not going to respond. He's still fast asleep.
Okay, so the book that we are going to read in the month of August for September session, Gautam wanted to bring us back to India because we have been globetrotting for a while. And he has given us 3 choices and all 3 are relevant to the India as it stands today. So we have a clear winner, The Indian Renaissance by Sanjeev Sanyal. So which has got a 58% vote share, and this is a book we will be reading.
Wow. Very good.
Good, very good.
Okay, now we are going to set the mood for the today's session. But there is one interesting clip that I'll share with you, and then we can start the proceedings.
Does Japan hate foreigners? It is true that people from overseas often feel alienated when they are in Japan, and there are some horrible Japanese who discriminate against certain ethnic groups. However, the majority of Japanese do not dislike foreigners. They are afraid. It may be difficult to imagine this in your country, but in Japan, except in certain urban areas, there are almost only Japanese people. Even in today's international world, there are many people who have seen people from overseas, but have never spoken to one before. In addition, Japanese people have very poor communication skills due to their collectivist society. This is because in such a society, individual communication is not so important, as the system determines relationships for you. With that said, many Japanese people do not dislike but are afraid of people from overseas, simply because they are not used to people from overseas, and because their communication skills are not good enough to get used to speaking with them. Conversely, if you make friends with Japanese people, I'm sure you'll be able to have many good relationships.
Yeah, Milind, take over.
Yeah, so let's go to the next slide, Srinivas. Yeah, thank you. So let me welcome our guest speaker, Professor Taiko Namura from the World Languages and Cultures faculty at Georgia State University. You will all remember perhaps that the first anniversary celebrations that we had in our book club, which included Japanese haikus written by Kenny's father-in-law. Professor Namura had then provided beautiful English translations of the haikus. And to her credit, by keeping the meter and structure of the haiku intact in English, which is really remarkable. She is again with us today, and she will be speaking to us about Japanese language and culture in the context of the Good Shufu that we are discussing today. To Professor Namura's credit, she also has read the Good Shufu after acquiring it like all of us. So please join me in a very warm welcome to my friend and colleague, Taiko Namura, to our book club. And with that, let me pass it on.
Hi, hajimemashite. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm really honored to be here today. And I'm talking about the background of the story today. So could you move to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is my bio. I teach as Professor Shri Hande told that I teach Japanese at Georgia State University, and also I am a candidate world language education at the University of Georgia. My research interest is Japanese gendered speeches, how to teach Japanese gendered speeches to American students. So based on the post-structuralism theory. I'm really interested in Deleuze and Guattari theory. And could you move to the next slide? Thank you. So this is Osaka. This image is Osaka. So the background of the story is Osaka, located in Osaka. And Osaka is the second largest city of Japan. And there are many rivers in Osaka. And this is called Yodo River, and very large river. And Osaka has been famous for, as I said, water, river, and trade. And in Tokugawa period, Edo era, Japanese people were divided into 4 classes, such as shi, no, ko, sho. There are 4 letters here. So first kanji means warriors, samurai, the highest rank, its highest rank. And the second one is farmers, the second rank. And the third rank is artisans. And the last one, the lowest rank, is merchants. But the merchants class was the lowest, but they had strong power at that time because of the money, actually. And the city, next one is the city is famous for unique, very delicious foods. For example, takoyaki, okonomiyaki, and yakisoba, and which are mostly sold at stores called yatai at festivals, matsuri. And people who grew up in Osaka usually speak Osaka dialects. There are many dialects in Japan, but Osaka dialect is very famous and distinctive. No priest class in Japan? No. No, there is. So, and people who, and so maybe Toru-san and Oto-san speak Osaka dialect with each other, perhaps. And Osaka is also famous for the culture of owarai, stand-up comedies. There are many famous comedians in Osaka, and Osaka people really like talk about jokes and humorous stories. So could you go to the next slide? So these are the pictures of Osaka's foods. First one is okonomiyaki, and second one is takoyaki. Taco means octopus. There is a taco, octopus in a takoyaki. And the third one is yakisoba noodle. So Japanese people really like eat very high carb foods. So these are all high carb foods, you know. So please go to the next slide. What is the meaning of yaki? Yaki is grill. Yaki means grill. And I'm talking about the important terms of Japan. So first one, shujin. Okay, shujin. Japanese wives tend to use the words my shujin, my master, watashi no shujin for their husbands. My shujin means my master. But the word became to be reconsidered by modern Japanese women because modern Japanese women think why wives need to say my masters to their husbands. So I'm a member of the Society of Gender Studies in Japan, and many members began to say their spices as otto or otto-san. Usually we Japanese add san after the names. For example, Mirindu-san or Shurikahande-san, for example. So instead of calling their husbands as shujin. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And the main word of the book, shufu. So the book, the author uses the romanization S-H-U-F-U, but I use S-H-U-H-U here because this romanization is closer to Japanese pronunciation.
Mm.
This is called it's Kunreishiki style. Kunreishiki style romanization. This is called Kunreishiki romanization. And the author uses Hebon style romanization. This romanization is closer to English pronunciation.
Mhm.
And we have used this word, shufu, from Meiji era as a meaning of housewife, wives who take care of all household chores. And this is a very important ideology. Ryosai Kenbo. Ryosai Kenbo means good wife, good mother. And this is the ideology for womanhood, Japanese womanhood, which has been adopted to Japanese society from Meiji Taisho era for long years. But many Japanese women, again, began to work outside of their homes and began to reconsider the meaning of this word. So could you go to the next slide? Thank you. Next one, shufu. The pronunciation is the same, and we use this word as a meaning of house husband, husbands who take care of all household chores. But we use a different kanji to differentiate the meaning. The pronunciation is the same, but the meaning is a different by using a different kanji. But however, there are few house husbands, shufu, in Japan, because the idea that husbands go out to work and wives stay at home to take care of the household chores is very, very strong in Japanese society. Okay, so so for example, 2022 global gender gap, Japan ranks 116 out of 146 countries. So still Japanese women's empowerment is not observed in Japanese society in terms of employment or political involvement. So please look at this kanji, fufu. Fufu means married couple. And otto, this kanji, first kanji means husbands, and the next kanji means wives, women. So please remember these kanjis are very popular in Japan. So that's all.
Okay.
Thank you for listening, and thank you.
Yeah, very good. Taiko, thank you so much for explaining the two conventions and a part of the language and Japanese culture, especially equality between men and women in Japan, how it is viewed. I think we can take 2 or 3 questions. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Yeah. So please go ahead. If you have a question for Taiko, please go ahead. Shankar, I think you were asking something in the text. Did you want to vocalize that?
No, it's already been answered. Yaki is grill, and there is no
Yes,
priest.
grill. Yes.
Yeah. So Shino Koshu, Shino Koshu covers everything in Japan, right?
Okay.
Right. Yes. In the old days.
And
I'd just like
need to add.
I'd like to, yeah, sorry. I'd like to compliment Namra-san for this beautiful introduction to these few words, and which is something we, as men, we can never understand, you know. This, so thank you so much, Taiko-san. Namra.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Just as Kenny has thanked you, another friend of ours, Nidhi, also has thanked you in the text, in the chat box.
I have a question too, if there's no one else.
Go ahead.
So in the book, it mentioned that more than half of married women who were working prior to marriage stop working after they get married. Is that still true?
Yes, that's true. That's true. And mostly women who go out for work their jobs are mostly part-time, not full-time.
Okay. So many years ago, I had gone to Japan for my company to
Yes.
meet our client who was Dentsu, which is a very big advertising agency.
Yes, it's
And
very famous.
yeah, and
Yes.
we gave a talk on a media system that we have, but in the
Yes.
audience of probably around almost 100 people, there must have been at least 15, 20 women. There were quite a few women.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Which maybe advertising is a little more open to women working and being in higher positions, or you know,
Then Dentsu is very, very really prestigious company in Japan.
Mhm.
So perhaps more the office workers at Dentsu are mostly women, mostly men.
uh-huh.
So it's difficult to land the jobs at Dentsu, I think, for women. It's difficult,
Mhm.
I think.
Uh, uh, Taiko, Anu had a question about, are there many women politicians in Japan? And another friend says you had a woman prime minister, but are there many women in politics in
I don't think
Japan?
there's been a prime minister. There's never been a prime minister,
Yeah, I
No.
don't,
unfortunately. Only the
I
governor of
don't know.
Tokyo is the only.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
what Shankar meant.
So,
But
so
are
she
there,
really, I mean, I remember there was a candidate, right? And she was a party leader. So maybe she lost. Is that what happened? Let me look up. Okay.
The Japanese Communist Party normally gets about 5 seats.
okay.
So it's like
So,
America in one that way.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Koike Yuriko. Koike.
Taiko, are
Yes.
there very few women in politics in Japan, or there are many women?
No, not many, not many,
Not many. Okay.
not many.
Okay. Anyone else has a question for Taiko-san?
Yeah, I just put one in the chat.
Yes,
Okay.
I had a perception that women were marrying later and opting not marry. I had a thought that women were marrying. That's why that so are you asking about the women working outside of their homes? In the case of the
yeah, I had read something a long time ago which said that there was a larger percentage of women who were buying their own apartments and living on their own and opting to not marry. So I was wondering if that was true and whether that was a relevant trend.
perhaps that is recent trend.
Okay.
But yeah, but there are not many women, such women in Japanese society, I think, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much, Taiko-san. As my friend said, this was very valuable as an introduction to our session on the book. And I'm glad that you will be attending the session with all of us. So
Thank
welcome
you.
to the session. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
You're
And
welcome.
I have something to say about the
Sure.
video clip you showed us.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
yes, Japanese people is maybe afraid of foreigners, foreigners maybe, but because of the lack of the skills of speaking English. That's the main reason, because Japanese is very different language from English. It's really difficult to speak English. So that is the main reason, I think.
Yeah. So I think we should say the Japanese people may be hesitant to talk to foreigners because of the language, but
Right,
that
right.
doesn't
I think
that doesn't mean that they are afraid.
But I've
Is
seen,
what I
isn't that
think.
true? Isn't that true in any society?
Yeah.
Japanese people tend to be friendly, so please do not,
Yeah.
please do not dislike Japanese people, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I told my colleague and friend that with that clip, I'm sure we'll get a reaction from Taiko-san.
But that
Okay.
is very, very fun video clip. I like that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So with that, we should proceed with our session. And our reader for the month today, who has very judiciously recommended the Good Shufu. And as the introduction showed, we are about to learn a lot more from her overview of the book, as well as from the reflectors. So with that, Anu, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So to be completely honest, I put in 3 books that I wanted to read, and then you guys chose the Good Shufu, and so I had the opportunity to read it. So let me start with the overview. In her article, Square Pegs and Round Holes, Marriage Between Japanese Men and Western Women, Anna Jassim notes that a Japanese groom and a Western bride is by far the least frequent scenario among over 20,000 international marriages each year in Japan. Seen in the West as cold, workaholic, and simultaneously chauvinistic and effeminate, Japanese men are among the least desirable candidates for husbands. Likewise, Western women, perceived as more assertive and emancipated than their Japanese counterparts, are quite far from the Japanese feminine ideal. I was not very sure about what to expect from Tracy Slatter's The Good Shufu. However, once I started reading, I was engrossed. Sometimes I forgot that it was a nonfiction book. The author, thank you. The author gives us a glimpse of her life in America before taking us to Japan, where she meets her future husband, Toru. The book felt like a peek into the author's diary, where she shares her deepest thoughts, fears, and hopes. Very early in the book, Tracy tells us some of the mistakes she would never make. Take blind leaps of faith, give up my home in Boston, become dependent on a man, build a traditional nuclear family like my parents had, or most important, cook dinner on a regular basis. By the end of the book, she had made all the so-called mistakes. Despite opposition from her friends and family in Boston, Tracy decides to move to Osaka, knowing fully well that she would be completely dependent on her husband, Toru. She slowly tries to acclimatize herself to a new culture and struggles with the size of the apartment, the limited number of appliances, no dishwasher, for example, and the aloof manner in which the local Japanese women treat her. She is shocked by the fact that she has to clean the house herself. I mean, now that, after Taiko-san has told us about the communications issue, you can now understand why people were hesitant to talk to her. So going on, one of the most beautiful aspects of Tracy's life in Japan is her relationship with Otto-san, or respected father. Early on, Otto-san would join Toru and Tracy for dinner. But unlike the dinners in the US where conversation flows freely, dinner with Otto-san was a quiet affair. Tracy became more comfortable with the silence over time, and the relationship between Tracy and Otto-san became very close despite the limitations on their communication. As Otto-san's health deteriorates, Tracy looks after him with tender, loving care. During the same time, Tracy and Toru are trying to have a baby. They face many challenges and disappointments. Finally, when they come to terms with not having a child, Tracy finds she's pregnant. She's simultaneously excited and concerned. She's concerned about whether the child will be normal given her age, and what to do if the testing shows abnormality. The person who so far has focused entirely on herself in the book now decides that she wants the baby no matter what the test shows. Tracy ends her story with an incident that hints at why she was willing to become the Good Shufu. Her husband was not a shackle, but a source of strength for her because he loved her unconditionally. Next slide. As I read the book, I found three dominant themes. The first was the dramatic change in the perspective of the author. From being focused entirely on the self, she became gradually less about what pleases her and more about how others feel and need. Her capacity to love grows over the course of the book. The second theme is about marriage. To a large extent, Tracy made most of the adjustments in the marriage, and Toru was her rock of support. The third theme is the interaction of Japanese culture, and the Japanese language with foreigners. Can foreigners assimilate in Japan? Should they do so? Using the metaphor of a butterfly's metamorphosis, Chacha will reflect on the caterpillar stages of Tracy's life from the early chapters of the book. Ravi will talk about the chrysalis stage where Tracy grows as a person in the core of the book, and Anjali will offer her perspective of the transformed Tracy as a beautiful butterfly in the later chapters of the book. A huge thanks to Chacha, Ravi, and Anjali for sparing the time to do this. And over to Chacha.
Thank you so much, Anu. I think that overview of the book showed a very nice perspective you've developed on Japanese culture. And I particularly liked the way you used the metaphor at the end to introduce the three reflectors. So with that, let's listen to Sandeep in the first reflection.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Milind. Thank you, Yanks. I hope I'm able to see the slides. Yeah. Embattled in the cultural wilderness of a foreign land, 36 years old Professor Dr. Tracy Slater finds an anchor in the nascent love of a 31 years old Japanese student, Toru. Despite fiascos in communication, Tracy resolutely pursues her assignment as a faculty teaching spoken business communication to a class of East Asian corporate executives of an MBA program, overcoming the gender nuances of an East Asian classroom. Constantly handicapped in conveying her thoughts and feelings during her overseas trips, Tracy misses Boston and its familiar sidewalks and cafes of the city where she has lived all her life. Unable to understand the cultural nuances, despite being fiercely independent, Tracy decides to dive into a bicontinental romance, throwing to the winds all the don'ts she had sworn to and pursue a complicated marriage, becoming dependent on a man, build a nuclear family, and most important, cook dinner on a regular basis. In the course of time, I have this stupid thing coming in way, just a minute. In the course of time, she even gives in to a crying child to colonize her time, exemplifying the adage, life is what happens to you while you are busy making other plans. Finding deeper comfort than ever before in another human's presence, Tracy wondered how many relationships would benefit from a lack of shared linguistics. Coming from a wealthy but kind of screwed up family with a chaotic childhood, Tracy is badgered by her family members for considering marriage involving regular travel across 2 continents with someone financially several rungs lower. However, despite the difference in customs, Toru remained unruffled amidst the ups and downs, standing by Tracy as a rock, and wins the day. Over time, Tracy, forever suspicious of marriage as an institution created to codify female servitude, gradually caves in to give up her staunch identity of an independent modern woman. Plenty of women have made similar pledges and broken them, but Tracy's retrenchments are more epic, spanning continents, cultures, and languages. In the book, Toru comes out as a traditionalist despite being from a well-educated and liberal family. He is loyal to his company, honors Japanese cultural expectations, sincere in his love for Tracy, and protective of her. At the same time, Toru balances his family commitments to his lonely father and Tracy's insecurities with polite firmness and understanding. I especially like the way he skillfully negotiates with Tracy as to why he can't relocate to Boston or the US. However, unlike Tracy, one doesn't find Toru particularly emotional in his display of love, and at times appearing to suggest an unstated take it or leave it approach. Very early in the book, we witness a misunderstanding between Toru and Tracy around the usage of word maybe. The incident reminded me of the trips to Japan and interactions with Japanese companies Nichimen Corporation and Showa Denko in the 90s. While drafting various MOUs, in one delicate clause, we had asked for a change, and the response was noted. Later, I was quietly informed that we shouldn't misunderstand noted as meaning agreed. Japanese are very skillful negotiators and commercially astute. Traveling through Japan, one is struck by the neatness and order of things, even in the rural interiors. Lots of wide open spaces with immaculate greenery, but tiny, orderly homes. Shopping in Japan can be overwhelming with the large number of brands and choices, especially miniaturization that captures intricate details in different forms. Much like there are over a dozen ways to say 1, 2, 3, depending on the kind and shape of what's being counted. However, the customer service was very courteous, with neatly dressed young girls chaperoning customers through the aisles whenever necessary. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Sandeep, for a very nice first 1/3 of the book and your own experiences in Japan while you were traveling there some time back. And with that, we should move on to the next reflection by Ravi as the butterfly evolves.
Thank you, Milan. If you can go to the first slide. So I think, in my view, the author uses very cleverly a sort of 5-stage U-curve model to describe how one deals with sort of significant cultural change and, in fact, cultural shock to tell her story. And chapters 8 to 13 that I will be sort of trying to very quickly review deal with the two middle stages. The first is the disintegration stage, where I think there is a sense of being isolated, feeling inadequate, and there's this general sense of bewilderment, alienation, depression sometimes, and even withdrawal. And then you move on in that change process to this third stage, which is actually the beginning of the recovery. It's also sometimes the most volatile, and sometimes people who think they're in an early reintegration stage may still sort of display a strong rejection of the host culture. With that sort of theoretical framework in mind, let's dive into Tracy's story as she evolves through these phases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the disintegration stage, as Tracy gets to know Toru's family, she reflects in her own words a sense of alienation. She says, I was becoming accustomed to my role as an integral part of this family, but one nonetheless who remained outside of the fluid conversation. And she describes this beautifully, I thought, as if my face was pressed to a pristine glass, so clear and light that it was welcoming, but for the invisible force of incomprehension sealing me off. So in an effort to integrate better, she overcomes her initial reluctance and starts taking lessons in Japanese, but struggles both with the complexities of the script and the grammar, as well as articulating her identity to an alien group of co-learners, where over 70% of college-educated married women give up their careers to become a good shufu. Her sense of unease only grows when she attends the wedding of Toru's sister Kai, where already stressed by a minor wardrobe malfunction, she forgets to bring the right underwear, and watching her formal introduction at the marriage, she senses a coldness from Kai's mother-in-law and is made to stand at the extreme corner when the family portrait is taken. Despite her ambivalence, she decides to marry Toru. And on the day they're supposed to go to the US consulate to get a certificate required for them to get married, they're informed the department has shut early for the holiday season and there would be a long delay. Next slide. Toru describes this absolute low point in her life. It said, I felt weary, overwhelmed, and pricked raw by a realization I couldn't shake. When I learned that morning that we couldn't sign our marriage papers, my first feeling was disappointment. The second was relief. Even when they finally get married, she struggles to comprehend why she is mentioned only as a footnote on the marriage certificate. Foreigners, Toru explains, were not permitted to appear in the main body of the family register. So although I was now legally Toru's wife, I was also apparently the family footnote. Lastly, as they prepare to move into their tiny little apartment, she feels completely exasperated with Toru's obsession of endless research on where to get the best deals for the new household goods they need to buy. But what ultimately sustains Toru through this phase of disintegration is Toru's love and unflinching support. In her own words, she says, but I knew Toru. He'd never drown unless human survival was impossible. He would tread water for as long as it took to figure out a way to save us both. Coupled also with Toru's uncomplicated optimism. When Tracy is struggling with what she believes is acute depression, Toru simply says, low or not low is no matter. It's just that feelings go up and then they come down. Tracy reflects, I kept his perspective wrapped inside, and it felt like a shiny pebble of wisdom, all the more brilliant for its simplicity. The next stage is where she slowly begins to reintegrate back in her cultural journey. And I think that happens when she is struck by two insights. First, as she says in her own words, instead of always needing to be a completely autonomous woman in total control, maybe I could even be a housewife, or at least part-time, as long as I chose that existence and could mold it as my own. And the second was, look, I wasn't getting anywhere anguishing about how much my current setup looked or didn't look like the existence I'd always imagined. So maybe it was time for me to figure out how to make my actual life into the best one possible. So that's the start of her sort of mindset to reintegrate. She begins to build a close bond with Toru's father and overcomes her utter dislike for cooking and household chores as she begins to appreciate the warmth of being a family. She also builds a support network of other expat friends, which helps her share her emotions about life in Japan with like-minded people. She also starts the Osaka and Tokyo chapters of the 4 stories. The reintegration is also helped when Toru, his father, uncle, and aunt, sister, and her husband visit Boston. They get to meet Tracy's family and have their wedding blessed at a synagogue, the Temple Israel, complete with a rabbi. Toru even agrees to wear a yarmulke, which pleases Tracy's mother no end. And yet Tracy is deeply uncomfortable how Toru's unwilling to mix with her newfound friends and prefers to keep their social lives as separate as possible. Tracy struggles both to understand and accept this. I felt a little lonely, she says, at the idea and unsure once again about what limitations and differences one was supposed to accept in a marriage. And then she recalls what her mentor and elderly psychologist had once told her, which I believe is one of the most powerful insights I got from the book. And this psychologist tells her that the most important part of a good relationship is not symmetry, but how you deal with the disappointment. I think Anu asked us also to reflect on a couple of themes, and I'll pick one or two of them. The first thing she asked us to reflect upon was that can foreigners truly assimilate into Japan? And this has been a subject we've been over already. But from what I read, Japan has one of the lowest ratios of immigrants to total population. I understand that number is less than 3%. And as Tracy says in the book, that even as she feels her bond with Toru and his father and family grow deeper and stronger, she struggles with getting to truly love Japan. And in her mind, that troubles her. She says, but I was still troubled by that malingering question, when will I fall in love with Japan the way I fell in love with Toru? After all, I love Boston. Wouldn't I need to love Osaka before I could finally let go of my regrets about this faraway life I had chosen? And this is an idea she struggles with. And I was struck that at one of the 4 Stories events, she meets this person called Donald Ritchie, who's a long-term American expat and a distinguished Tokyo author, who tells her an answer to a question on when Tracy asked Donald when he fell in love with Japan, he said, my dear, no one ever falls in love in Japan. We stay only because we find it endlessly fascinating. And I thought that was a sort of interesting reflection, and we can talk about in the open session. The second was sort of Anu's request for us to reflect if this book in any way had changed our own views about marriage, right? And now this is totally personal territory, but for me, I think in some ways,
Ravi. Oh, okay.
So for me, in many ways, I think this has reinforced some of the thoughts about what makes a successful marriage. And I believe that possibly one of the reasons why so many marriages are failing is because people are losing a faith in the institute of marriage itself. And therefore, to compensate, and therefore, if you look at Tracy's idea, and this has been quoted before, her ideas evolved around her own parents' sort of failed marriage. And sort of the firm thing she said to herself was never take blind leaps of faith, never give up my home in Boston, never become dependent on a man, never build a traditional nuclear family, like my parents had, and as other people said, never cook dinner on a regular basis. But this is born out of a trauma of what she has seen a dysfunctional marriage do. And I think the way people are compensating sometimes for this lack in the faith of the institution of marriage is probably to go on a quest for absolute symmetry. This marriage can only work if there's absolute symmetry, and to find your soulmate who is completely matched with you, and that's the only way I will get into marriage. But that, in my view, that's probably an unrealistic goal. And I think as Tracy and Toru couldn't be more asymmetric, and yet they're able to build a loving marriage because they find a way to deal with the differences. And I think the caring, the interdependence, the sharing of mutual joys and sorrows, what creates a loving family, a home, wherever you are. So maybe it's worth in closing, just paraphrasing that wonderful gem that I found interesting, that maybe the most important part of a good marriage is not symmetry, but how you deal with the discipline. Thank you.
Fascinating, Ravi. I like the way you've used all the quotes in the book so powerfully, and also your own personal insight into the institution of marriage that can be interpreted in so many different enriching ways. Very nice. So with that reflection by Ravi, let's move on to the last part of the book where Anjali takes over. And I think it's important for a mother to reflect on this last part of the book. So go ahead, Anjali.
Can I see the slides? So thank you very much. The reflections before really set the stage. The section that I was looking at, the chapters 14 to 17, and the epilogue in the book, reflect the three themes that Anu highlighted about the movement from self-love and self-obsession to selfless love and loving service to others, marital adjustments, acceptance of the life partner, a recognition that this is a love for always, not an experiment for 3 years, a holistic acceptance of Osaka and Japan for the author's own reasons, not as a corollary to the husband and his needs. But what struck me most about this section of the book was the experience of loss and the acceptance of it. The author mourns the loss of her Boston studio and the illusion it gave her of a bolt hole to escape to. However, along with the regret, she experiences a release from responsibility. In her words, a clean new space in my chest that used to be filled with worry. And the second thing is that another experience of loss comes with the invasive, humiliating, and roller coaster nature of her attempts to conceive. The intimate attack on self-confidence comes through in the phrase, my young face and bottle blonde highlights, apparently masking my shriveling insides. She asks, my life had telescoped. How did I become this person obsessed with my ovaries? Despite the side effects and monthly disappointments inherent in the hormonal treatments and the IVF procedure, the author discovers a well of strength. She says, my confusion and fear about having a baby hadn't dissipated, but somehow they didn't staunch my growing resolve to try IVF. Mixed up in all this is the recognition that the treatment would unfold in Japanese and remain incomprehensible, and hence she finds the wisdom and willpower to engage with infertility chat sites in English. The experience of trying to be a mother also changed her attitude to Japan. She says, I was committing to Japan full-time now. I chose Osaka for my own reasons, not because of Toru's career or familial obligations. She also discovered an inner conviction and faith. Our baby might exist in some way or place, be waiting for us. I'd married Toru without understanding in my brain how our relationship worked when we were so very different. When for years I had striven for a life that looked nothing like the one I'd chosen. Maybe I didn't need to get it, I just needed to go with it. Infertility was challenging my preference for logic over instinct. This section actually on this whole infertility and miscarriages reminds me of a number of my friends who've also struggled with infertility and went through it. And their misery and unhappiness, and sometimes they explained, they said, you know, we even resent and are so angry with others who are managing to have their baby so easily. So this whole experience of loss, this self-confidence was beautifully explained. I've never really understood those women, but reading about this really helped me. The third experience of loss is tied up with the miscarriages she goes through. The author makes a poignant statement after her miscarriage. Motherhood was a whole new way to break your heart. However, despite the grief she goes through with each miscarriage and failed attempt, the author acknowledges that miscarriages changed her. She says, our grief was small compared to many people's. We'd lost embryos, not children, chances, not lives. But it did teach me one modest lesson about loss. Usually it leaves no meaning in its wake, just the responsibility to build beyond it. Again, there's been a lot written about miscarriages now, and many people go through miscarriages, don't even talk about it, and it's never understood that there's a grieving process. So again, the way she's written about it so simply created an empathy here. The fourth was the experience of the illness of her father-in-law, seeing him lose control over his body but retain his dignity. The way she looked after him, spent time with him, mourned his slow deterioration, is a sad description of old age and the burden that our growing physical disability creates for our loved ones. But Tracy accepts this, saying, I thought about the Japanese tendency to show love and support, not through words, but with actions that increase interdependence. And she acknowledges the debt to her father-in-law. Something in me had changed, something about my faith in my ability, not just to survive, but to prize the all-consuming demands of love. And in some ways, because of the recent shoulder fracture that I went through and the dependence that I experienced on Ishan, I understand from the receiving point of view how love can be expressed through tenderness and care in a very different way. Then I knew this is what Otto-san had given me. Maybe that's what makes love bearable. Gave us a shot at being bigger than all the ways love could take us away from ourselves and then eventually deliver us back. And this relationship helps her understand her relationship with her husband, from her 3-year trial to a commitment for in always. Ultimately, she returns full circle to where she started, someone who wanted to be in full control of all aspects of her life. The book ends with the death of the father-in-law and the birth of her Hafu, half Japanese baby, through natural conception. But she acknowledges, you can't properly find yourself if you haven't let yourself get lost in the first place. The acceptance of the present, this comfort in going with the flow, is an insight she gets when her father-in-law refuses to speculate on a possible transfer to San Diego and the implications for him. She says, imagine not trying to sort out the future what-ifs until they become present realities. I just needed to live the life I had now as fully as I could, and know that wherever I ended up, I tried my hardest in the time I'd been given. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjali. I think you tracked the high point of the book through this last phase very well in your reflection. And now we understand the full import of the metaphor that Anu used, how Tracy became a butterfly at the end of the book. So thanks a lot for all the reflections and for the overview. And with the introduction that Takeo-san gave us, we are now ready for our discussion. Just a gentle reminder of the rule of 3, which is after anyone speaks, just let 2 other people speak before you speak again. So let's go. Whoever wants to start with.
Okay, I guess I'll go first.
Okay.
So again, I think the book was a very light read. It didn't take, I mean, the flow was fairly good. I think the language is good. In terms of, I think the reflections brought out a lot of the good aspects, especially what Anjali had talked about. Again, my initial perspective was, I think Tracy was kind of overthinking almost every step. She was trying to figure it out in her head. And Otto-san's was the opposite, let it come to you. You don't have to build that castle in the air. Like the move to San Diego, there's no need to figure it out. We'll get to it. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. More the practical aspect, I guess. One thing I found really curious was the way the Japanese corporate reacts when they get married, right? They're out there setting up his apartment, meaning there's a sea change in terms of his perks, I guess, or his amenities, which I found rather unusual, right? I don't know how the employees view it, but it's the whole organization being the paternalistic, they're out there signing his lease or paying for his appliances and all that. I think that was about it. So I'll let it go now.
Thank you, Vivi.
I have a question, Milind.
Yeah.
Or rather, a point to make. One thing that I could not understand is that having lived in Japan, in Osaka, and back and forth, etc., but for 18 years, and married to a Japanese, I couldn't understand why she didn't make more of an effort to speak the language, and especially as you're married to, and going back to what Mura-san said, and I see it all the time here in the Middle East as well, about language making you get closer to the people you speak to. And you're married to a person, you're living with the family. I couldn't just understand why she sort of makes a cursory attempt to learn the language and just gives up.
Sharad, to your point, look at what Vicky has said in the chat about Tamil.
Yeah, I can imagine it. And I can empathize with it. And I see it here. And you can go back to the famous quote from Nelson Mandela about speaking a language that somebody understands, you speak to his head. But if you speak the language that he speaks in or she speaks in, then you speak to the heart. And then you're married to this person and you're not making any effort to learn the language. That's the part I could not just get.
She does try, Sharad.
Sharad, it's very difficult to speak for the author, but I think my own thought briefly is that she was so torn between whether to be in the US or in Japan, that uncertainty about where to live permanently, and that hesitation was one of the reasons why she never attended to the language.
Melinda, if you live in a society, you don't even know what you're shopping in a place and you have to take your husband's help. I think that's a little difficult to digest.
Now, can you tell us whether the language is difficult to learn? I mean, there may be certain issues with learning the language for a foreigner. Can he?
It's supposed to be. It's supposed to
Certainly.
be very difficult for English speakers. The East Asian languages of Japanese, Korean, and Chinese are supposed to be extremely difficult to learn for English speakers. And you
Kenny,
know,
what
she
would
does
you?
mention that too. She says that there are 3 types of alphabets. I mean, it must be. I think it would be a very difficult language to learn.
Yeah, what does Kenny think?
Yes, Kenny.
Zen, what is it? Zen, Musukashi. Nai. So it's not difficult, most Indians pick up Japanese very easily, just like that. They'll pick it up in a month. But so even when my wife used to go to Khan Market, she was very fluent in English. But when she went to Khan Market, 20, 30 years back, or Vasant Vihar, and since she looked Japanese, they all started speaking to her in Japanese, the vendors, the shop vendors. Yeah. So Japanese is very easy to learn. The grammar is very simple. And for instance, in English, we have a hard T and a hard soft T, like th and t. But in Japanese, there's only th. They don't have th. So it's Tokyo, it's Toru, but Tracy. So Tracy doesn't exist in Japanese language. You have to say Toresi. So but English is extremely complicated. The grammar is too tough, but especially for Europeans, for Europeans, English and American, because their voices are not designed for that. So the Japanese alphabet, for instance, the phonetics is R, E, O, A, O, which is same as in Hindi. Hindi also, in English it is A, E, I, O, U, but in Japanese it is R, E, A, O, U, which is same as in Devanagari, R, E,
And
U, A, O.
let me ask Kenny what Taiko-san's answer is to Sharat's question, because she teaches American students Japanese. So do they find Japanese difficult to learn, or how do they get along with it? Taiko-san.
Yes, many students told me that learning Japanese is very difficult. But if in the case that students are very interested in the culture and language of Japan, it's very faster to learn and master the language than the students who are not interested in Japanese culture or language.
I have a question, sort of follow-on question on the same subject, which is that I've seen here where there have been many waves of people coming in and salespeople, and the point that Kenny made about going to Khan Market and wife being able to follow another person speaking Japanese. Salespeople learn to speak languages very quickly, whether it's Russian, whether it's Arabic, whatever it might be. I'm saying that if you're living in that place for so many years, how can you not pick up and be able to understand and be fluent to get a working knowledge of the language? But that's my real concern, is why did that not happen? Was there a complete resistance to this? Yes, things are difficult. You do difficult things all the time. You make the effort to do so. Yeah. Anyway, but that's fine. I'll pass this over now.
Speaking for myself once again, I never learned Japanese. Of course, I never lived in Japan. And my wife was a very fluent English speaker. Her mother tongue was, of course, Osaka Ben, as Taiko-san knows, from Osaka. She was from Kobe, but she had studied in a Catholic school, and she had majored in American literature, and she was a very fluent speaker of not only Japanese but English also. In fact, her Japanese she spoke so fast that even the Japanese people had to tell her to slow down. She's speaking too fast for them. so you can understand my situation. The moment I try to say even a sentence in Japanese, she'd get totally, it's okay, leave it. Stick to English.
Okay.
Oh, then
Yeah, sorry.
I'll pass it over to some other questions.
Kumar,
So,
did you want to-
one thing I must say, that having been to Japan so often, nobody ever complains about Japanese food. Japanese food is so delicious, and I think everybody loves Japanese food. So whether you can speak the language or no, you can definitely enjoy the Japanese food. Definitely.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I was in San Francisco last week, and the only thing I remember from my last trip is the great sushi I had, where the cook was like a monk, all dedicated to his sushi.
Why didn't we see you? Why didn't we see you?
Because
I don't understand.
I was there for a conference.
You could have
Shankar.
come and had some sushi with us.
Next time.
Interestingly, Chacha, now that you made the point about Japanese food, in Bandra in Bombay, we have so many Japanese restaurants and they have an excellent vegetarian food. I don't know whether they have so many varieties in Japan for vegetarians, but I'm surprised and they're all delicious.
Oh, they have. Japanese food is very heavily Japanese, vegetarian oriented. A lot of it.
Yeah.
Being a Buddhist country, they never ate chicken. Fish was always considered to be vegetarian because it's an island country. So the cuisine was main protein is fish. But chicken, meat and all was never eaten until they westernized in the 1860s or 70s.
Yeah, that is so much like the Saraswat Brahmins and the Bengali Brahmins in India.
Yes, right.
That
They
they eat
considered
fish.
the Europeans to be barbarians because they ate chicken and meat.
Nidhi, your hand has been up for a while, so.
Actually, Chacha beat me to it. I also had a question about food for Tako-san more than anyone probably, which is Japanese curry. Where did that come from? Because it's nothing like Indian curry. It's a completely different dish.
Yes, the Japanese curry was created by the chef in Meiji Taisho era. So that is the Japanese curry is totally different from Indian curry. Because Indian curry is more spicy than Japanese curry.
Yes,
Japanese curry is more sweet.
If I may add, it's more like the British, the English version of like a meat. It's stew, brown stew. A brown stew.
Trivia has what?
What it is.
Sake Trivi has a bottle. He's showing a bottle. Trivi?
No, the chairman of Mitsui Group came to visit us, and as you always have the gifts and all that. So I've got a gift which is really quite unique because I've never had the Japanese black tea. So it's like it's a bottle. I haven't yet opened it, but I'm kind of mystified, Japanese black tea.
Really?
Because I said, they said it's tea. And I said sencha, and they said, no, this is black tea. I said, wow, black tea, yeah, limited product, it said. And it's a product of Sutama. And of course, so much detail in the label of a Japanese product, you just get mad looking at it. Because it's complete like mystery to me what is written there, and
it's unusual that it's bottled like a wine. Why is a bottle like a wine?
Like a bottle of wine, yeah.
So you have it
while you open
I can open it now, but you guys are not there.
Tell us what it tastes like, Trivi.
you better translate it to see what the expiry date on it is. Open it before.
No, it's 20th of August, 2024 is it's May 20th of August, 2024. Okay.
Okay. Well, with that, if anyone else who hasn't spoken yet wants to say something about the book or about today's session.
Well, I would like to hear from Kenny about, how did your relationship, if you'd like to share, and are there any similarities or differences between, Tracy
A lot
and
of difference.
Toru and Sachiko and,
There's a lot of difference, Shankar, because Sachiko was brought up in a pretty westernized. So in fact, when she visited India, before we'd even thought about getting married, she met my family and she fell in love with them rather than me, because of the music and the piano, all that stuff, which I don't do. I'm not a musician. I'm not a musical person at all. But she was very musical, and she spoke English so well. So she never learned Hindi, even in spite of living here for 35 years. She never learned Hindi because everyone speaks English here. Yeah. And of course, she kept working throughout the time. So she never had time to think about all these things. So she was fully
Raja,
employed. Yes.
yeah. Raja, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, comment on the fact that, the language differences, when you have a global team working with a client in Japan, language has definitely proven to be one of the major hurdles, and you have to very carefully weave your way through that process, very delicately, and be very accommodative, so that you can actually make concrete progress. But then when I think about it, it's not much different than the kind of issues that one runs into in the Middle East. I did quite a bit of work in Saudi, for example. Arabic was a necessity in certain circumstances, and you had to have the ability to have someone perform the role of translator, in both directions. And I'm seeing that in, with a client in Korea, and surprisingly enough, with a client in France. So we're actually having to hire somebody in France in order to, make it a bit easier to.
Suresh?
Yeah, I was wondering if someone can throw some light on what is the difference between the Korean culture and Japanese culture, especially in terms of the status of women. If I remember right, I think Korea did have a lady president sometime back.
Yeah, that's right.
I can say from having read the book, Suresh, that Tracy visited both Korea and Japan, but she fell in love with a Japanese man, not a Korean man. So that tells me a lot about Japan.
So I've been to Korea 2-3 times, a number of times, and worked with a number of Koreans and so on. And what I learned in my recent trip was that the Korean culture does not accept an outsider. So if a Korean man or woman marries somebody who is not Korean, that child is not accepted. And it can be extremely difficult for the outsider. And even for the Korean, because even if the marriage breaks up or something, they go back to their own country, they probably will not, their child will not be accepted. So that is something that this is not researched or anything. This is just because of having friends who explained it to me. On that said and done, Ishan and I have a very close friend whose son recently married a Korean woman. And
Sharat's son was living in Korea for a long time.
I know. If I can add something to what Anjali said, I think it's quite the reverse, Anjali, because my son Karan has lived there for 8 years because he's now in Dubai. But I know a number of his friends, Americans and other nationalities, are married to Koreans, Korean girls, a number of them. And in fact, there's another Pakistani friend of ours whose son is married to a Korean, and she now lives in Dubai. I don't see any, and we attended this kid's marriage, by the way, in Seoul. And I don't think there's such a stark difference as being made out. They get along very well, and their families get along well, etc., etc. So I don't see that being a big hindrance. It's like, I guess, any marriages from different cultures. The fact that they get ostracized from society, I don't think that's ever come up in any conversation.
I think there's one huge difference between Korean culture and Japanese culture. At least now, I think Korean culture is obsessed with perfection. They have the highest rate of plastic surgery. Koreans are notorious for, getting photographs, not really sightseeing. Whereas Japan has that concept of, what is it, wabi-sabi, finding beauty in broken things, joining broken things, admiring, beauty in unusual places. I feel that's one very big difference. And it may be that the Koreans were subordinate to the Japanese. Japan had occupied Korea and ruled them for many years. So it may be that the Koreans are trying to, like nouveau riche people trying to catch up, whereas the Japanese are more assured in their position. But I think that's a huge difference. This quest for perfection. And by the way, right now, I think Korea has an even lower fertility rate than Japan. Women are just rebelling and revolting against the traditional system. Also, the highest suicide rate of any OECD country, I think, South Korea. But I'm sure our Japanese guest, Ayuko-san, can tell us more. Maybe she has some ideas about this.
Nidhi, more than perfection, I think it's the concept of basically beauty. Japan is the second largest beauty market in the world after the US. So that says something. Much more than Korea.
Taiko-san, you want to respond?
So Niji-san, Gyangwa-san, Niji Gyangwa-san said what I wanted to say. So
Okay.
there is nothing I need to add.
Okay, thank you.
But one associated question. So the word hafu, is that like a good, is it a good connotation or a not nice? So like if we say Megumi, Kenneth's daughter is a hafu, is that a good thing or not a good thing? Not clear to me, right?
No, it's a good thing. It's a good. They're very proud of it. Yeah.
It's a good
Yeah. So
okay.
in fact, so she was
I think so.
exclusively brought up in India and Japan. So the other day, when she first we first went to a Korean restaurant. The Japanese are very fond of Korean food, and first time she went to. She was already around 18 or 19. She said, why didn't anyone ever tell me about Korean food before? So she was very angry. So she loved it so much, yeah. So, but the only problem with the Korea, I think, when you go to the Korean food is when you go, they give you a chopstick, thin, slender one made of stainless steel.
Very difficult.
An historical, it's very difficult to eat with.
Very difficult to eat with.
Historical because one of their kings, I think, or one of the leaders once wanted to promote the steel industry in Korea. So he said all chopsticks should now be made of stainless steel. So obviously the food is superb.
Just
and all their grilled meats. In Japan also, you go and see these shops, huge, massive restaurants selling, the meat which is grilled on your table. So that's all Korean. It's not Japanese.
They have it here in New York too.
So for me, the best line was at the last one, and Ellie, who gave me a happier ending than I'd ever dared imagine.
Yeah.
That's very, very good. High point. High point of
high point.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, one thing I'd like to add is that I was also quite taken up by her Tracy's. Of course, what she wrote about Japan, the IVF part of it, I never knew. It was quite a personal experience. And the stuff she had written about her life back in Boston, her Jewish family background and Boston life. So that was, for me, quite revealing and quite something new, which I like very much. Yeah.
Coming back to what we discussed about Korea versus Japan, I wanted to ask Taiko-san, in the US, we see a lot of Korean students coming for education. But I don't see as many Japanese students outside Japan, particularly in the US. Is there any reason why we don't see many Japanese students in the US?
This is my guess, but many Korean parents want to send their children to United States. That is a big reason. But Japanese parents are not very interested in sending children to foreign countries, I think. And so I think so. This is my guess, but
ਉਹ ਡੱਬਾ ਵੀ ਦੇ ਦਿਓ ਇੱਕ ਮੇਰਾ
Maybe the Japanese universities are much better than the Chinese and Korean universities. So there's no need for them to go abroad for a good education.
Interesting.
Isn't
So
there
maybe
also isn't there also a connection with the Korean history with the United States, where with the occupation as well, and the fact that even till today there's an American quarter, an American presence in Seoul, for example.
Yeah.
And they continue to do so. There is an ongoing, far greater ongoing association than they
well,
probably.
there's a Sharat, there is a US base in Okinawa, right? Since
It
World
is, but
War.
possibly. It's, maybe.
They're all
I don't
treaty
know.
allies. Both of
Yeah,
them are
sorry.
treaty allies.
Also, the
Yes, Vicky.
historically, there may have been, you know, the conflict between Japan and the US might have a bit of an influence on the parental generation at the moment. That might change in the future.
I agree.
Could be, yes. Interesting.